Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir, daf Dalet. For those who are new, by the way, today is Friday's daf and Shabbat's daf. I put up on the website on Friday after the Shiur goes up. So within usually half an hour or so, the next day's daf is up and you can listen before Shabbat. Today's daf is sponsored by Goody and Eric Wild, our beloved mother-in-law, Lily Wiles, Zichronah Lebracha, and the Shloshim since her passing. Aside from the many acts of chesed and philanthropic organizations she created, Lily was also a pioneer of women's learning. Several years after making Aliyah from France in 1970, she wanted to learn Gemara, but organizations like Hadran didn't exist back then. So Lily and her friends started matan around her kitchen table, helping generations of women deepen their Jewish learning and connection to our tradition. We honor her with our collective learning today. Okay, we're now going to get started. We have a Mishnah from yesterday. Hareini Nazir min hachartzanim umin hazagim, umin hatiglachad umin hatumah. Actually, before we start, two things that it's always helpful when people comment and say things. One is, Eli Comfort corrected me about the mechakel chayim b'chesed, which I said is sustaining in general and not necessarily food in a food-related kind of way that we say in our davening, which is why I wanted to point this out, because you do say this every day. He said, first of all, he said he's coming out with a book on tefillah, so a little bit of promotion, and he about the Amidah specifically, and he said that he proves from all different kinds of ways that it specifically means food here also in the davening. So that's Eli Comfort, if you didn't catch the name, the head of Hadar, one of the heads of Hadar. So anyway, that was one comment. And another, I saw a question come up about why is it important what the Nazir, what the person who's taking upon Nazirut is thinking? Why is that so important? In other words, why is this issue like, who cares? Didn't he just want to take upon Nazirut? So if he didn't express it clearly enough, what does it make a difference? So we're maybe paraphrasing the question a little bit incorrectly, but the idea is being, why is all of this, and we're going to get to this today as well, and it'll come up as we see later, why is this all so important? Because if you want to be a Nazir, so you want to be a Nazir. What's the difference exactly how you expressed it? But that's the whole idea. Lo nitnan nazirut ela lahafla. It's one of these sources that says, because it says ki afli, there has to be a clear expression. And that seems to be why it's so important that these things are expressed clearly. Today, we're going to have a whole discussion about, you said, I want to be a Nazir Shimshon. How did you say it? And does it work and not? And we're going to see a variety of opinions. And some that say that the question is how clear, and it's not, there's no good answer to this question, because I think there's some who think it has to be incredibly clear. And if you're not incredibly clear, you're actually not even a Nazir. And then some side on the direction of maybe some of these are describing situations where you want to claim that you didn't really mean what you said. And the court comes and gets involved. And that's part of the question, why is the courts involved in being involved in your Nazirut? But then again, the courts do get involved in all sorts of things. And the court is saying, what do you mean? You said you were going to be a Nazir and we're holding you to that. And you claim that's not really what I meant. And then we have to figure out, what did you mean? So it's not 100% clear here which one we're discussing. And today we're going to see a perfect example that relates to those two approaches to whether it's, did you really take it upon yourself? Or are you maybe trying to claim you didn't and the court is saying you did? So there's no good answer to that question, but here are some approaches and we will see that later on today. So you said in this case, I'm going to be a Nazir for one element of Nazirut. Remember, there's three main areas of things that the Nazir can't do: the hair, the wine, grapes, and all that, and the impurity to dead people. So you said one of them. So the Mishnah had said you're still a Nazir, which then we pointed out that's a machlok at Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. See a bunch of machlokot with Rabbi Shimon today. Rabbi Shimon says you're not a Nazir. You have to say all of them. Or, now he doesn't say you actually have to say all of them. You can either say all, or you can just say Hareini Nazir, and that's enough. But if you said Hareini Nazir and I won't drink wine, then you're not a Nazir. The rabbis say no. You say I'm a Nazir and I won't drink wine. You obviously mean that you won't do all the other things as well. You just pointed out one of them. And Rabbi Shimon had learned it from the pasuk, Mikol asher yaseh migef anayim mechartzanim va'adzag, which seems to explain all these and this, from this to that, which basically means you have to be forbidden from everything, the whole range. That was Rabbi Shimon. And the rabbis say, well, there's this extra verse. Okay, I didn't say this really well yesterday, but there's this extra verse, Miyayin v'shechar yazil, because it also says you can't drink wine. And then it says you will estrange yourself from, or, take a nizilut upon yourself from wine and beer. Okay, we're going to translate this literally right now, even though we're going to see later it doesn't necessarily mean that. But because you say from wine and beer, which is an extra pasuk, that extra pasuk must be saying, even if it's just from wine, you're going to be a Nazir. So now we're going to do this ping pong back and forth. And for this, I had to have a chart to help you go back and forth with the ping pong if you look at the study. So now we're going to start with Maihi. So what does he do? What does Rabbi Shimon do with the rabbi's pasuk? After, we're going to have to go back to what do the rabbis do with Rabbi Shimon's pasuk. But it's going to take us a while until we get back to that one. Because once we start with this, we're going to start with all ping pong. He learns this pasuk for this, and then they're going to say, well, where's the other guy learn that from? And then we're going to say, oh, he learns it from some other pasuk. So what does he do with that pasuk? And we're going to go back and forth. At the bottom of Gimel Amud Bet, this is what we saw yesterday. You need yain b'shechar yazil, according to Rabbi Shimon, not to teach you can only do, again, one of them and be an entire Nazir, but it's to teach you a yain of a mitzvah is forbidden like yain of reshut, meaning just for pleasure. Maihi, what are we talking about here? What is yain mitzvah? So the Gemara says, right, if you want to say kedushat avdalta, right, if I asked you wine for a mitzvah, you would immediately say kiddush and avdallah. That's when we have wine for a mitzvah. Now, there's two ways to read this sentence. Today, we're going to have a lot of those, where you can read something in one way, and you can read it in the exact opposite way. So the simple reading is, and the way we normally use the word hare, and today we're going to see that some of the commentaries at least are going to say, oh, this is Nazir, just like Nidarim had an atypical use of certain words. Nazir also does, and this really, hare doesn't really mean hare, it means something else. But for now, I'm going to explain it the simple way, and then we'll see what the problem is with it. Mushba va'omeh mehar Sinai means you're already commanded from Har Sinai to do this, meaning how can Nazir come and override something that we're commanded to do by the Torah? Okay, because Nazir, right, he says, I can't drink wine, but you're already commanded to drink wine for Kiddush and Avdallah by the Torah. That seems to be the simple reading. What's the problem with that? There's a few problems. Number one, Kiddush and Avdallah, it's true that Kiddush is perhaps, seems to be Kiddush is by Torah law. Havdalah, not so really. Most people think it's derabanan, rabbinic. And the need to drink wine for it is certainly rabbinic for Kiddush also. So how could you possibly say that we're commanded to drink wine on a Torah level, and therefore the Nazir can't drink wine? Doesn't make any sense. So therefore, even though some commentaries do say this is the case, and the truth is, if you didn't know D'oraita to Rabbanan, it's such a basic that we drink wine for Kiddush. So it's reasonable that you might have thought, right, that you need a special drasha to teach you the Nazir can't drink wine for Kiddush, because I might have said, right, let's make an exception just once a week. It's important mitzvah. Even if you say it's D'Rabbanan, it is kind of an important mitzvah. Some people say, hare is not because they're mushba v'omeh mehar Sinai, and behold, they are. Hare is more like vichi. Vichi is, and what? Are you mushba v'omeh mehar Sinai as a rhetorical question? In other words, why do you even need a drasha to tell us that the Nazir can't drink wine for Kiddush? Of course a Nazir can't drink wine for Kiddush. What? Is he mushba v'omeh mehar Sinai in a kind of ridiculous way to say it? Of course you're not commanded by Torah law to drink wine for Havdalah and Kiddush, and you are commanded by Torah law as a Nazir not to drink wine, so you don't need any special drasha to teach you that this is forbidden. Of course it's forbidden for him to drink wine for Kiddush. Who would have even thought that he wouldn't be? Okay, so that is a different way of understanding it, which actually makes a lot more sense. The problem is it doesn't match the language. You have a problem, it doesn't match the language, you say, again, like I said before, Nazir has a little bit of a strange use of words. It's a little different than our atypical. And sometimes words that are used in other Masechtot mean one thing, in Nazir it means something else. And I'm not the one who says this, the commentaries point this out. So the Gemara says, to answer this question, Ela ki hada amarava, it's not talking about Yeh mitzvah of Kiddush and Avdallah, for whichever way you went in terms of your reading of this text. Ela ki hada amarava, it's to teach you what Rava said. Shvua she'eshteh. We have to find a different case where you're commanded to drink wine. Now, there's nowhere else in the Torah where you're commanded to drink wine, unless you took an oath. So it's not like there's a particular person that's commanded, but if I take an oath that I swear I'm going to drink wine, then I become a Nazir. That's what that pasuk is teaching you. So shvur she'eshteh, I take an oath that I'm going to drink wine. V'chazal v'amar, and then you came back and said, hareini nazir, I'm going to be a nazir. Atya nazirut chayla al shvuah. So the nazirut comes and basically trumps the oath. That's what this unique pasuk is teaching you. So again, where were we? The rabbis use miyayin v'sheichal to teach you, even if you only vow from one thing, you're still going to be a nazir. Rabbi Shimon says, oh, it's to teach you, miyayin v'sheichal, extra pasuk, to teach you, even if you took an oath to drink wine, if you then became a nazir, you can't drink wine. So now we obviously have to figure out, okay, and here I'll pull up the chart for a minute so you can see the study guide. Okay. The study guide now, if we look here, it helps you in terms of what's each one doing with the pasuk. So yayin v'shechar yazir, again, the forbid mitzvah reshut, that's Rabbi Shimon. The Chachamim say, even if you only vowed from one. And now we're going to say, so where are the rabbis going to learn that from? Rabbanan nami, hai mebayle le'asur yem mitzvah kiyem reshut, in kanlim akram yayin, mai v'shechar shmat minatarti. In other words, they're going to say the rabbis also need to learn yem mitzvah asur kiyem reshut. So where are they going to get it from? They say, well, miyayin v'shechar yazil has two elements to it, wine and beer. So miyayin, they're going to learn only one, right? If you only vow against one, all are going to be forbidden. From the word shechar, they're going to learn, and you can look at the chart now, right? Just like Rabbi Shimon had l'asur yem mitzvah kiyem reshut over here, from yayin and shechar yazil. Now Chachamim are going to say, that's from the word v'shechar. So what you would really do here is you would remove the word v'shechar from this column over here. Miyayin yazir is where he learns one of them. And from shechar, we're going to learn yem mitzvah is forbidden like yem reshut. Now the obvious question is going to be ping pong back to Rabbi Shimon. So what does Rabbi Shimon do with that extra word v'shechar? So we're going to have two options here of what Rabbi Shimon could possibly do with the word shechar. And then we're going to have to assume the rabbis don't agree with everything they said. So we'll see that inside. Rabbi Shimon, it's also a word we don't generally use, la'alufe. It comes from yalfinan. Yalfinan is usually the way we say it. We derive shechar lemikdash. We make a gzera shava. The same word appears in two places. It says by going into the temple, if you're a kohen, dichtiv, yayin v'shechar al tesh atau b'necha itach. The kohanim are commanded not to drink another connection, kohanim and nazirim. Kohanim are commanded not to come in drunk to the temple, and it says yayin and shechar. Now again, yayin and shechar generally mean wine and beer, okay? But what are they going to say here? Ma gabe nazir yayin hu delitza aval shar meshkin lo. Well, the nazir, even though it says wine and beer, it doesn't really mean wine and beer. Shechar is coming for something else, okay? Maybe it's also to say wine that gets you intoxicated. But because shechar is beer, but it also is the root of drunkenness, shikul. So the shechar by Nazir doesn't mean beer. Okay, the Nazir is only forbidden anything that comes from grapes. Therefore, we're going to take the gzera shava and say when it says shechar there, it doesn't really mean shechar, and that kohanim can actually come into the temple even if they've drunk something else like beer. Okay, as long as it's not wine. So here, magabe nazir yayin hu delitzar, it's only wine that's forbidden, aval shar meshkin lo, but not other drinks. Af gabe mikdash nami yayin hu delitzar aval shar meshkin mashtaklin lo. So also by going into the temple, any other drink that might intoxicate you is actually not forbidden. That's what he uses shechar for. That's option number one. What Rabbi Shimon does with that shechar. And this comes to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, which basically means the rabbis who don't have this drasha must agree with Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Again, I told you we're going to have a lot of machlokot about Rabbi Shimon today. Again, here we don't actually know that Rabbi Shimon says this. We're just, we're hypothesizing. Ditan, Rabbi Yehuda omer, achal dvela ke'ilit, that's something made with dates, okay, which are intoxicating. V'shata dvash, or he drank honey. V'chalav, or milk. We see from the Yael story, the milk also made people a little drunk. Some people say it doesn't really make you drunk, but it does make you a little bit not think as clearly as you normally do. V'nichnas lemikdash chayab. So Rabbi Yehuda says you're obligated if you come into the temple like this. Okay, it's a problem. So now we have, again, this is our first explanation. Shechar was used by Rabbi Shimon, shechar to teach you It's not, just like it's not a problem for a Nazir to drink shechar, it's not a problem for the Kohen. Against Rabbi Yehuda, who obviously the rabbis must agree with Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so yeah, thank you for pointing out. I actually wasn't sure. I forgot if the dvelak kili might be, it's figs and not dates. I wasn't sure, right? The dvash is usually from dates. It's usually silan. And the dvelak kili, it is probably from figs. Thank you for the correction. As I said it, I wasn't sure. Okay, ibai deima. Alternatively, like I said, we're going to have two options of what Rabbi Shimon does with shechar. Maybe he doesn't disagree with Rabbi Yehuda about that point. But Rabbi Shimon, and here again, we're going to have this a few times today, we're going to have two different readings of how to read this, and they're opposite, just like we have with the Mushba Ba'omed, two opposite readings here also, because the key is missing from the text here. When you start reading this, you realize they didn't finish their sentence. So Rabbi Shimon, lately Isur Halal Isur. So they're pointing out here that Rabbi Shimon doesn't believe in this principle, and he doesn't hold that Isur is Halal Isur. What does that mean? Well, we're going to read it right now, an example, and then from the example, we'll understand what this means. Ditanya, as it says in a Braita, Rabbi Shimon Omer, ha'ochel nevela b'yom kippurim patur. If you eat a non-kosher animal on Yom Kippur, you're exempt. Why are you exempt? Well, you're liable for one of them, right? But ein isur chal isur, you were already forbidden to eat the nevela. Now that you ate it on Yom Kippur, when you have an additional forbidden, you're not allowed to eat. Ein isur chal isur, you're only liable for one. Right? Let's say it was accidental, you're supposed to bring a sacrifice. So you're only liable for one because so once it's already forbidden, it doesn't become doubly forbidden. Okay, that's what it means. Okay, that's it. That's the end of the sentence. So what does that have to do with shechar? Wasn't very clear. So, so now they say, one second. So now they say the following. Okay, if the reason why it says yayin v'shechar, that extra word v'shechar, is to teach you that by Nazir there's an exception to the rule. What they're telling you here is, in general, Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold isur halal isur, but when it comes to a Nazir drinking wine, it does. Special, unique halacha by Nazir. So, for example, if I took an oath to drink wine, I took an oath not to drink wine, and then I became a Nazir, and then I drank wine, I wouldn't be liable twice. I'd be liable for my oath, not for nizirut. Okay, that's one option. Okay, this is talking about punishment, by the way. Not that it's not forbidden, but punishment. How many punishments do you get? You know, usually it's an issue if you're doing it accidentally, do you get double 2 korbanot or something? Now, that's one way of reading it. Now, it's weird, though, to read it that way because it never says it's an exception to the rule, right? It never says that anywhere here. It doesn't really say what this pasuk has anything to do with it. Some people actually say the reverse. That this is the source for ein isur halal isur. This is where Rabbi Shimon learns it from this extra verse v'shechar. Again, without going into all the details about how they do that, but I wanted to just show you that oftentimes you'll read a sentence and the main part is missing, and as soon as the main part is missing, the commentaries often go in very different directions as to fill in the blanks about what is missing here and what it really means, because it's not so clear cut. Okay, and yes, if you're a Nazir, so here's a good example. If you took upon Nizirut on Yom Kippur, where you were already forbidden to drink wine because it was Yom Kippur and you couldn't eat anything, and then you took upon your Nizirut that day, then you wouldn't be obligated as a Nazir, for example. That would be another example. Okay, so, or you would be if you say it's an exception to the rule. Again, it really depends on how you view this sugya. Okay, next. So now what are we up to? So let's just go back to our chart for a quick minute. What we've done is yayin v'shechar yazil. Each one explains differently. Chachamim for the purposes of what we saw in our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon learned some other halacha. Where did the Chachamim learn that other halacha from? From the word shechal, from that extra word. Then we had to go back to what does Rabbi Shimon do with that extra word, and we said either he learns that just like a Nazir can drink beer, so can the Kohanim going into the temple. Option number 2 is, again, according to the sheet, I put it up that you would get double lashes, because even though generally he doesn't know isur chal isur, in this case he does. Again, like I said, there is some other explanation. So now we have to go back to what? We're up to the words le-Rabbanan. Now, where did Rabbi Shimon learn his halacha from? That you have to be forbidden to all of them from the pasuk. It included all these things, basically saying you have to accept the whole full gamut. So the Rabbanan yaktiv mikol asher yaseh migef hanayim. So now we're going to go to that verse. What do we do with mikol asher yaseh migef hanayim michartzanim va'ad zag according to the rabbis? Amar lach Rabbanan. Another fascinating issue we're going to see right now, which we don't have enough time to go into, but I'll just mention it a little bit. This isn't the fascinating part yet, but what does it mean? Migefen hayai, right? Whatever is made from the grapes, michartzanim va'ad zag, from even the grape pits to the grapes to the peel of the grapes. All of these are forbidden. What does this teach you? This teaches you that if you ate some of the grape skins and you ate some of the pits, but you didn't have, remember, we've talked many times about requisite amount. We even talked about it just the other day about hotzah, carrying, right? And that you need a requisite amount to be liable. Also to be liable for the Nazir eating something forbidden, he needs to eat a requisite amount of a kazayit. So let's say you ate a little bit of grape pits and a little bit of grape skins. Do you have to eat a kazayit of grape pits, kazayit of grape skins, or could you combine them? So what does he say? Why does it say mechartzanim va'ad zag, right? As if there's this gamut to teach you that they join together for the shiur. Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. What's the problem now? Where does Rabbi Shimon learn this halacha from? So this is the interesting part. Rabbi Shimon late said he doesn't believe that they can combine. Why not? Titania, Rabbi Shimon omer, kol shehu lamakot, lo amru kezayit ela le'inyan korban. He says when it comes to, there's two tracks of doing a sin. One is intentional and one is unintentional. When it comes to unintentional, then you have to bring a korban if you did it unintentionally. So you bring a sacrifice, that you need a requisite amount. But when it comes to lashes and you did something wrong, it's no shiur. If I ate a bit of a grape seed, right, a grape pit or something like that, or I ate the skins of a grape and I'm a Nazir, I eat a little piece, I'm already liable to get lashes. There's no such thing as a shiur, a requisite amount. And this is the fascinating topic, right? Do you need a requisite amount to be liable for lashes or not? Right? That's very interesting. If I do something intentional, what's the difference if I ate a little or I ate a lot? Right? It's like when you say to your kids, "Don't touch me," and then they go close and they almost touch you, or they touch you a drop. You went against what I said. So does that, is that wrong or not? It's actually a good debate, right? Because what you really meant is don't touch me in a way that really bothers me. A little bit of touching might not really bother me. It might. Anyway, it's a very interesting topic. Requires, in my mind, further delving into, which we don't have time for in the shiur, but definitely an interesting machloket. New Mishnah. Now we're moving on. If you heard the introduction to the Masechet of Hayeled, if you haven't heard it yet, I recommend listening to it. It's short. It's only about 22 minutes. A very great overview. So definitely recommended maybe while you're cooking before Shabbos. Now there's different types of Nazirim. Number one, there's a Nazir we're going to get to in tomorrow's daf. Stam Nazirut, which means I just said I'm going to be a Nazir. We're going to say it's about 30 days, maybe 29. We'll see a machloket about that. Then there's someone who says, I want to be a Nazir olam. I want to be a Nazir forever. I'm going to talk about that very shortly. And then there's someone who says, I want to be a Nazir like Shimshon. We're going to have a whole interesting issue about Shimshon, what that means exactly. So before we get into really what is Nazirut Shimshon, first they're going to say, how do you take upon yourself Nazirut Shimshon? Hareini k'Shimshon, k'ben manoach, k'bal delila, k'misha akar daltot aza, k'misha nakul plishtim etenav, harei Nazir Shimshon. If you say, I'm like Shimshon, like the son of Manoach, that was Shimshon, right? We're all talking about Shimshon, the famous, right? Who fought against the Philistines, who had this long hair, and then Delilah gave away his secret. They cut his hair, he lost his strength. Everybody knows the story. Kibal Delilah, the wife of Delilah, the husband of Delilah. Kimisha Akar Daltot Aza, the one who broke down the doors of Aza. Kimisha Nakul Plishtim Etenav, the Plishtim blinded him. You say all those things, Harei Nazir Shimshon. Now, the way the Gemara is going to understand this is that, or at least one reading of the Gemara, we're going to have a debate here again about how to read things, two different tracks. It's too tempting for me to show you how the same text could be read totally differently by different people. According to the way most of the commentaries read this, you have to say all these things, okay? Which just seems very weird. You have to say, Hareini k'Shimshon, k'ben manoach, k'bal delilah. Tosfot points out that some of these are nouns and some of these are adjectives, and that you really only need one of the adjectives. Okay, where you draw the line is a good question. Like, is the husband of Delilah an adjective or a noun? Is it describing the person is the husband of Delilah? That's a noun. right? But certainly the one who broke down the doors of Gaza and the one who the Plishtim took out his eyes, that's a description of who he was, not his name, so to speak. So you need the first part. You have to specify Shimshon, the son of Manoach, possibly also the husband of Delilah, and then you need one of these descriptors, okay? Or maybe Baal Delilah is enough, or Misha Akar Del Todaza, or okay? You need one of those. Otherwise, we're not necessarily sure who you're talking about, okay? Even though that seems a little strange. We're going to see in the Gemara how the Gemara reads this, and then I'm going to deal with some of the questions against this reading. So the Gemara starts off and says, Lama li lemitna kol halam. Why did the Mishnah, now Lama li lemitna is a language of the Mishnah. Why did the Mishnah need to specify all of them? However, again, according to the one I'm reading, the reading that I'm reading right now, it's really not a question of Lama li lemitna. Why did the Mishnah need to say it? It's why does the person who takes upon Nazirut need to say all these things? And you're going to see in a minute why they think that. Because it says, Shriche, you need them all. Di'i Amar, because if he said, now this is not if the Mishnah said, right? Usually Lama li lemitna is why did the Tana of the Mishnah need to say this? And if the Tana had said only this and not that, we might have been confused. But it's not the Tana they're referring to the person who took upon the Nazirut. So if the Nazir had just said, Hareini Kashimshon, Shimshon Achrina, we might have thought he wants to be like some other, right? I want to be like my friend Shimshon. Hamash Malan Kiben Noach. That's why it says you have to say Kiben Noach. And then we know Shimshon, the son of Manoach. V'itana Kiben Manoach, but if he said Kiben Manoach, which seems like, again, according to this reading, he said Shimshon, the son of Manoach. Could be there's someone else named Shimshon, the son of Manoach. Hamash Malan Kibal Delilah. Therefore, you have to say, like the husband of Delilah. And here they understand as or you need some sort of more descriptor. By the way, this reminds me of when Abraham is going to the Akedah and God tells him, Kachna bincha et yichidcha, right? In the famous midrash there, my son, which son, right? The one you love, Asher Ahavta et Yitzchak, right? He has to get so specific because maybe it could be understood in some other way. So that's one way to read this Mishnah. Major problematic way of reading this Mishnah. What do you mean? If I say already Shimshon, I'm not a Nazir? It seems weird, right? You would think it's pretty clear. So we have a few different ways of dealing with this. The Tosfot Reed says, and this goes back to how I started with that question someone had asked, which is, Tosfot Reed says, if you said Hareini Nazir Shimshon or Hareini Kashimshon, that works. But if for whatever reason you said that kind of declaration, and then you weren't a Nazir, and the court said, what are you talking about? I thought you're a Nazir. We heard you say you're a Nazir, and why aren't you keeping laws of Nazirut? So if he only said Shimshon, he could say, oh, I didn't mean that Shimshon. I meant some other Shimshon. And then he could get out of it by saying this. But once he says the words, there's no way out of it. And that maybe we're only talking about a case where there's a disagreement between him and the court. Again, it's a little strange to us that the court is getting involved in something like this, which is a personal thing between him and God, but it's possible that the court would get involved in those areas. So that's an interesting interpretation. The Meiri points out a different interpretation, which is he says, no, Lama li lemitna is really in its usual use. It's not a unique use of it. And it's really and this goes back, I saw in the chat, you were talking about Yadot, which is this Mishnah is just describing possible ways you could say Nazir Shimshon. You could say, I'm Shimshon, I'm the son of Manoach, I'm being like, right? These are all, I'm being like the one who the Plishtim knocked out his eyes. And these are just alternate possibilities. To which the Gemara says, why did you have to say all these? Isn't it obvious? And it's saying, no, it's not as obvious as you would have thought, because maybe you could have said this means something else. And then it's a totally different way of reading the Gemara. He actually has a bit of a different version also of the text of the Gemara, which basically corresponds a little better to his interpretation. So then you'd have to read things a little bit differently, but that's another way of reading this, because to the Meiri, it was inconceivable that you would actually have to say all of these statements as it was to the read, and therefore they each came up with some way to deal with that problem. Okay, again, there's so much to all these sugyot. It's hard to just keep going, but we're going to keep going. Ma bein Nazir olam le-Nazir Shimshon. So what's the difference between someone who takes upon Nazirut forever and someone who takes upon Nazirut to be Shimshon? Both of them, theoretically, are forever Nazirim. So the Mishnah is going to describe the differences, two main differences. Nazir olam, hichbid sa'aro mekel b'tach. If you're a Nazir forever, if your hair gets too long and it's bothering you, you're allowed to cut your hair. Now, you can't shave it all off, but you can trim it. Umevi shalosh behemot. And when you do that, you actually have to bring the 3 sacrifices that a Nazir brings at the end of his Nazirite period. You have to bring those also when you cut your hair. Ve'im nitma. And secondly, if you became impure to a dead person, you're not allowed to. So you'd have to be mevi korban tumah. You'd have to bring the korbanot that a Nazir that becomes impure generally brings. Nazir Shimshon, we know this from Shimshon. He never was allowed to cut his hair. That was the whole thing. If you say, I want to be Nazir Shimshon, you can never, ever cut your hair. V'im nitma, and if you become impure, eino mevi korban tumah, which could be explained in 2 ways. Either you're allowed to become impure to dead people, and therefore, if you became impure, you don't have to bring a korban tumah. The way the Gemara is going to understand it in the first reading is, you're not supposed to become impure to dead people, but if you do, you don't have to bring the sacrifices that are generally brought by a Nazir who becomes impure. But they're going to reject that reading, but that's the way they first read it because of the language. If one becomes impure, sounds like you can't become impure, but if you did, you don't have to bring the sacrifice. If it really was permitted, they would have just said, mutar litamei lemetim. It's permitted to become impure to dead people. So the Gemara starts off with a classic, where is the Mishnah coming from? Like our first question in the Gemara here, or a second question, which is Nazir olam man dechar shmei. Where did we get to Nazir olam from? Who was talking about Nazir olam? We were just talking about Nazir Shimshon. Why all of a sudden did they mention Nazir olam? To which they say there must be words missing here from the Mishnah. It's missing another line. Just like we said, if you say Hareini Keshimshon, you're a Nazir Shimshon. If you said Hareini Nazir olam, you're a Nazir olam. Okay, it's missing those words. And then once it has that, Ma bein Nazir olam Nazir Shimshon, and here they're just repeating the words of the Mishnah. So then once we've established Nazir Shimshon, Nazir olam, what are the differences? And then they explain the differences. Nazir olam, if beats alom ekel batal, you're allowed to cut your hair, maybe shalosh behemot, and you bring the 3 animals. Ve'im nitma, maybe korban tumah, and if you become impure, you have to bring those sacrifices. Nazir Shimshon, if beats alom ekel batal, Nazir Shimshon, if his hair got long, you can't shave it off, you can't cut it at all. Ve'eno maybe korban tumah, and you wouldn't have to bring a korban tumah. Okay, we're now on Amud Bet, to which, as I told you, the Gemara is going to immediately infer from the wording, Korban hutula might have on the Nazir chayla. It sounds like he doesn't bring a sacrifice, but he's not allowed to become impure to a dead body. In which case, we have a big problem with our Mishnah. Mani matnitin lo Rabbi Yehuda v'lo Rabbi Shimon. It doesn't seem to match any of the opinions that we know to be. Titanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. There's a machloket about Nazir Shimshon, a very basic machloket. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, which reminds us of the beginning of Masechet Nedarim. Nazir Shimshon mutar litamei lemetim shekem matzinu b'Shimshon shenitma. We're going to see at the end of today's daf, which is Nazir Shimshon is allowed to become impure to dead people because Shimshon himself was impure to dead people, and therefore we know that it's permitted. Rabbi Shimon Omer, so that shows it's entirely permitted. That doesn't match our mission. Rabbi Shimon Omer Nazir Shimshon lo amar klum. Haomer Nazir Shimshon lo amar klum. Rabbi Shimon disagrees with both Mishnah what we just read, which is anyone who says this declaration, I am a Nazir Shimshon, it's a meaningless statement. There is no such thing as Nazir Shimshon according to Rabbi Shimon. Why not? Because Shimshon never accepted Nazirut upon himself. Remember the beginning of Masechet Nedarim where we had a whole thing. You have to be Nodir b'davar hanidal. You have to connect it. Harei alai korban. What's a korban? I take an animal and I declare I'm sanctifying this for a korban. That's something that I'm vowing. It has to be connected to something else that was vowed. If I say I'm a Nazir is a vow. If I say I'm like Shimshon, Shimshon was born a Nazir. He never took on a vow to become a Nazir. So I can't, according to Rabbi Shimon, I can't say I'm going to be a Nazir like someone who was a Nazir by birth and not by declaration, okay, by some vow. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon says you can't be a Nazir at all. There is no such thing. So mani. Now, here they're just describing what we already know. They're spelling it out. Again, assuming the language of the Mishnah is you can't become impure to dead, but if you did, you don't have to bring all the sacrifices. It's not the biggest deal, but it is forbidden. And here Rabbi Yehuda said it's not forbidden at all. And Rabbi Shimon, he doesn't even hold by Nazirut Shimshon. So it doesn't seem to match either opinion, and the assumption is it's got to fit within one of them. To which the Gemara answers, Lo olam Rabbi Yehuda, must be Rabbi Yehuda. Why did the Mishnah say it's permitted litamei lemetim? Because when it came to, what are we comparing? Nazir olam, Nazir Shimshon. This is a literary structure. In the first section, it said, im nitma, if he became impure, mivi korban tum'ah. You'd have to bring the slew of korbanot that a Nazir tamei brings. So therefore, when they came to the second part, Nazir Shimshon, they said, im nitma, you don't have to, because it's not forbidden at all. And then you don't understand it specifically, it's using that language because it's trying to say it's forbidden, but if you did it, you're not obligated. No, it's coming to just use the same language that was used in the first part, but it really means you can become impure to dead people. So we end up matching our Mishnah to Rabbi Yehuda. Before we go on, the Mishnah goes off on a tangent. And what they want to say is this machloket. We want to go into this machloket about davar. It's almost like we had the first part of our Masechet was very parallel to the beginning of Nidarim. This is also parallel to a discussion we had in Nidarim, similar, which is, let's try to set up the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon to this machloket between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yaakov. Ditznan, hare alai kibachol. If you say this loaf of bread is going to be forbidden to me like a firstborn animal. Now, a firstborn animal, what's unique about a firstborn animal? It's born sanctified. It's not a davar hanidal. I don't take it and sanctify it, or maybe I do. We'll talk about that later. But it's sanctified from birth. Why is it sanctified? Because it's the firstborn. It's not like I took an animal and I said, I want to bring this as a sacrifice and vowed to bring it. So I said, this loaf is going to be forbidden to me like a firstborn animal, which is sanctified, but it's sanctified from birth and not because I made it sanctified. Rabbi Yaakov osel, Rabbi Yossi matil. So my love, would you not say, right? He says it's forbidden for you to eat this kikar. It works, your vow. Rabbi Yossi says it doesn't work at all. So is this not the machloket that Rabbi Yehuda savar lake Rabbi Yaakov damar lo be'inan davar anidam? Just like Shimshon wasn't someone who vowed, and you can still forbid yourself to be like him. The loaf also wasn't you're saying it's like a firstborn that wasn't vowed to be forbidden, and you're allowed to forbid yourself in this way. For Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi says it's permitted in the Bechor because it's not something that you vowed to forbid. It was something inherently sanctified. Shimshon was inherently sanctified because he was born already sanctified, born already a Nazir. So if it works for that, it works for that. It should be the same. To which the Gemara rejects, and we're going to have a bit of a long discussion about, or a little bit of a discussion. No, you can't say that. Both Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yossi, we're now going to say it's not the same machloket. They both think, like Rabbi Yehuda, that you need davar hanidal. What's the issue with the bechor? It's a unique law. When it says ish ki yidor neder laHashem, that was the pasuk about the vow. When you take a vow to God, the to God includes something additional because you don't really need it. You take a vow really for yourself. What does it mean to God? To include even you could be, as we say, matpiece, to connect it to a bechor. Even though bechor isn't davar nidal, special drasha. Rabbi Yossi disagrees with that. Rabbi Yossi amar lecha, in other words, again, the basic is you can't do it. Rabbi Yaakov said special drasha, it includes. Rabbi Yossi doesn't have that drasha. So what does he do with the word laHashem? For something else. Chatat and Hashem is something you're obligated to bring, a sin offering or a guilt offering. However, the animal that you choose is of your choosing, as opposed to a bechor, which you have to bring to the temple, and you actually give it to the Kohen, and it's already sanctified. Here you take an animal and you sanctify it. So he says that's what it's included. So if I say, I want it to be like that animal that's Korban Hashem, that would be included in the word laHashem. That's what laHashem comes to include. That works according to Rabbi Yossi. So, to which the Gemara says, why it seems arbitrary, why that one and not the other one? Well, exactly for the reason I explained. That one, at least the animal itself, was connected to, it wasn't a voluntary offering, but it was connected to an animal that I put sanctity on. That wasn't sanctified before that. But but the firstborn, again, is not by a vow that this animal became sanctified. It became sanctified when it was born. For Rabbi Yaakov amar lecha bechor nami matpiso b'neder. How does Rabbi Yaakov understand it then? Why was the bechor included? Because he says even a bechor you yourself sanctify. How do we know this? Detanya shal beit Rabbeinu amru minayin nolad lo bechor b'toch edro shemitzvah alav lakdisho. How do you know if you have a bechor born in your flock that you actually have to sanctify it? It's got both. It's sanctified from birth, but you actually have to sanctify it also. How do you know this? Shenemar hazachar takdish. It says takdish is a commandment. The firstborn male, you have to sanctify. So he says that turns it into davar nida. Even though it was sanctified before, you still have to do an action, which makes it a davar nida. Which is why Rabbi Yaakov says this works to say harei alai b'chor. For Rabbi Yossi Amar Lecha, no, the mitzvah lahakdisho ilo makdish milo kadosh. Yes, it's true there's a mitzvah for you to sanctify, but what if you didn't? Would it be sanctified? Yes. That means it's not davar hanidul, and that's why this doesn't work. So basically, we have this ping pong back and forth, but in the end, they both hold davar hanidul is necessary. It's just a matter, do we view bechor as somewhat davar hanidul, which Rabbi Yaakov does, Rabbi Yossi doesn't at all, in which case, okay, now, so that's almost the end of this discussion of this sidetrack where we thought maybe this was the same as the machloket. We said it's not, as Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. But now we have this other question, which is if that word lahashem comes to include even something that wasn't nidar, so gabei nazir nami haktiv lahashem. If you remember, by the nazir it says ki aflilin dor neder nazir lahazir lahashem, or I think I'm saying it right, but right? Ki aflilin dor neder nazir, yeah, lahazir lahashem. So lahashem appears there also. So maybe that should include even nazir Shimshon, for example, like the bechor. So they say no. Now we get to the very famous story that we saw in Nidarim. So I said, as we got already to being a Nazir is an Aveira, here already at the beginning of the second, we're getting to where being a Nazir can be a positive thing. The Lahashem is to teach you how you're supposed to become a Nazir, if you do it for the right reasons, for God. And therefore, you can't learn there to include Nazir Shimshon. So here comes our story. Amar Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik said, he was a Kohen. He said, Miyamai lo achalti Asham Nazir tameh. Normally the Kohanim eat the meat of the Asham, of a Nazir. So he said, I never ate the meat of the Asham of a Nazir who became impure. Other than there was one man who came to me from the south. He had beautiful eyes. He looked beautiful. He had beautiful long curly hair. So why did you go through this process where now you're going to have to shave your hair at the end of it? I was a shepherd for my father in the city. My city, I went to get water from the well, from the stream. I saw my reflection in the water of the stream. And I immediately said, oh, wow, I started thinking I'm so beautiful. My evil inclination started getting the better of me because the Tardenu in olam tried to take me out of this world. Right, basically meaning going after terrible things. I said to him, my own evil inclination, you empty. What are you doing trying to be so arrogant in this world that's not yours? In the end, you're just going to be like worms in the ground. I swear I'm going to shave you for heaven. This shows, by the way, the end of the process is the sanctification. This is the source for the Ramban, who basically talks about that. I stood there and I kissed him on his head. So I'm not sure if this actually connects with the Rambam. Maybe that's not true. Anyway, rushing in my head is going in different places. But anyway, Amadati, I stood up and I kissed him on his head. Amartilo, there should be many more Nizirim like you. You're doing it for all the right reasons. That's what La Hashem is. It's not coming to include Nazir Shimshon, according to Rabbi Shimon. Alecha katuv omer, ishki aflilin dor neder nazir la Hashem. He says that's who the verse is referring to when it says to be a Nazir to God. This is the ideal Nazir. Okay, because we don't have time, we're going to just finish up the daf now. Shimshon, lav nazir hava, v'haktiv k'nazir elohim yanar min habetin. This question seems to be, again, it's a little bit missing the important part, but it seems to be saying, what do you mean? Shimshon wasn't declared a nazir by some vow, maybe by his father when he was born? Because the malach says, the angel who came to the wife of Manoach said, he will be a nazir from when he's born, basically, or from the womb. But it sounds like maybe you need to declare him. To which the Gemara says, no, hatam malachu dekamar. That was the malach. The malach gave him the sanctity. So no, it's not davar nida. Last question for today, and I'll leave the very end about the Nazir olam and how we know he's allowed to cut his hair for tomorrow's daf. Very long daf today. Now, last question, minal and ditamid lemetim. How do we know that Shimshon was mitameh to dead people? First of all, we know he was always battling and fighting. Now, Gentiles don't have tumat mate in a tent, but if you touch them, you're going to become impure. So they say, what about, right? It says Belechi Achamor, he took the cheekbone of a donkey and he killed 1,000 people. Then he could have just thrown it at them like an arrow. That doesn't prove anything. It doesn't mean he touched them. Must be from this pasuk. he killed 30 people, he hit 30 people, and then he took their clothes. When you take clothes of a dead person, you're going to end up touching them. Maybe he took the clothes off and then he killed them. No, look at the order of the pasuk. He hit them and then he took their clothes. So obviously he must have come in contact with them. Maybe they were almost dead, but not actually dead. Ella Gemara Gemirela. I'll end with, since I spent most of today's off talking about different versions, even this line has different ways of understanding it. Gemara Gemirela simply means we have a tradition about it. So, okay, it's learned by tradition. What is learned by tradition? Some people say the order of that verse, that it's vayach, right, vayikach, and that they were actually dead, is a tradition. We have a tradition about this story, and then we can learn it from the story. Some people say, no, this simply rejects all our options and says, we just have a tradition that Shimshon was mitamei l'metim, and that's it, and be done with it, okay? And that's two ways of understanding what the tradition is, and whether it's that or that. In any case, the conclusion is that Shimshon was mitamei l'metim, and therefore we know that anyone who's a Nazir Shimshon can be impure to dead people. With that, we'll end for today. Tomorrow's daf, which I'll put up in a little bit, will be about how do we know that a Nazir olam gets to cut his hair every once in a while. And we're going to learn from Avshalom, who was a Nazir, and we'll start with the psukim there in tomorrow's daf. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and meet up together on Sunday.